The silence was deafening over German airfields by May 1945. Empty hangars stood like tombstones. The Luftwaffe was finished. Just 18 months earlier, things looked very different. German pilots talked confidently about turkey shoots. They expected easy kills when American bombers came calling. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The transformation began with a phone call in April 1940. Britain was fighting for its life. Sir Henry Self needed fighters desperately. Any fighters that could match German performance. North American aviation had never built a fighter before. They made trainers and light bombers. When the British wanted them to build P-40 Warhawks under license, chief designer Dutch Kindleberger made a bold offer. "Give us 120 days. We'll design something better." What emerged was revolutionary. The Mustang's fuselage was sculpted for perfect airflow. Its laminar flow wing reduced drag to impossible levels. Most importantly, it carried massive internal fuel tanks. This would eventually let it escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But there was a problem. Early Mustangs used Allison engines that failed at high altitude. The RAF used them for low-level missions only. As high-altitude fighters, they were disappointing. German intelligence dismissed the early Mustang completely. A 1943 report concluded it posed no threat to Reich air defenses. They called it suitable only for ground attack missions. They were catastrophically wrong. The marriage of British and American engineering changed everything. Rolls-Royce had developed the superb Merlin engine. When Packard started building Merlins in Detroit, someone had a brilliant idea. What if they mated the Merlin with the Mustang's exceptional airframe? The results were breathtaking. The Merlin-powered P-51B could climb to 40,000 feet. It cruised at speeds that left German fighters struggling. Most importantly, it could do this for 8 hours or more. Ronald Harker test flew one of the first Merlin Mustangs in October 1942. His report to the Air Ministry was electric with excitement. "The performance is phenomenal. This aircraft can escort bombers to any target in Germany, and it can outfight anything the Luftwaffe has." Combat would prove him right. But first, let's see what American bombers faced without proper escort. October 14, 1943, Black Thursday. 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses took off for Schweinfurt. The ball-bearing factories there were crucial to German war production. The mission planners knew it would be costly. Schweinfurt was 400 miles from the nearest Allied fighter base. What followed was a masterclass in German defensive tactics. Over 300 Luftwaffe fighters attacked in waves. German pilots had perfected head-on attacks. They dove through bomber formations at 500 Medienpeiter's closing speeds. Their cannons ripped through aluminum and flesh. By evening, 60 flying fortresses were gone. Another 138 came home damaged. 600 American airmen were dead, wounded, or missing. The 8th Air Force lost over 20% of its force in one day. General Curtis LeMay was blunt. "We cannot accept losses like this. Either we get long-range fighter escort, or we abandon daylight bombing." German pilots were jubilant. Egon Meyer and Georg Peter Eder had tactics that made American bombing seem impossible. Joseph Goebbels proclaimed Reich air defenses impregnable. But even as Germans celebrated, P-51B Mustangs were arriving at English airfields. The aircraft that would change everything was entering combat. December 1, 1943. Captain Don Blakesley led the first Mustang combat mission. They escorted B-17s attacking Solingen aircraft factories. As they crossed into German airspace, Luftwaffe controllers scrambled interceptors. Among them was Hauptmann Klaus Mitusch. He was a veteran with over 30 victories flying a Focke-Wulf 190. Mitusch later described his shock in a letter to his wife. I saw this aircraft below and thought it was another Thunderbolt. Big, heavy, probably slow in a turn. I rolled down expecting an easy kill. Instead, he accelerated away like I was standing still. Then came around in a turn so tight I couldn't believe it. Before I knew what happened, he was on my tail. I was running for my life. That first mission saw 3 German fighters destroyed. No American losses. More importantly, it proved something revolutionary. American fighters could now reach any target in Germany. German pilots had grown used to predictable rhythms. American bombers would appear escorted by P-47s or P-38s. Eventually, these fighters reached their fuel limits and turned back. Then came the happy time. Unescorted bombers were vulnerable to concentrated attacks. The Mustang shattered this routine. Suddenly, German pilots faced fresh American fighters over distant targets. Fighters with unlimited endurance and superior performance. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff wrote in his diary after first encountering Mustangs, "These American fighters are unlike anything we've faced. They appear over distant targets with full fuel and ammunition. Our pilots report Mustangs can outrun our 109s in level flight. They outturn our 190s in sustained combat. This changes everything." The psychological impact was immediate. Fighter pilots who had grown confident now faced extended dogfights against fresh, well-trained Americans flying superior aircraft. The hunter was becoming the hunted. Let's step inside the cockpit with the men who flew these missions. Lieutenant Robert Johnson described his first P-51D flight. Everything felt different. The visibility was incredible. That bubble canopy let you see everywhere. The controls were light and responsive. But what really got your attention was the fuel gauge. We could fly for hours at combat power and still have fuel to fight. Captain Chuck Yeager flew Mustangs with the 357th Fighter Group. His description reveals the new reality. "We'd take off from England with enough fuel to fly to Berlin and back. Plus, fuel for 30 minutes of combat. The Germans couldn't believe it. They'd attack expecting us to run low on fuel and head home. Instead, we'd stay and fight. Often, we'd chase them back to their own airfields. This extended combat persistence fundamentally altered air warfare. German pilots operating from home bases had always enjoyed advantages. They could break off combat and land nearby when low on fuel. Suddenly, they faced American fighters that pursued them relentlessly. The familiar Reich became a hunting ground for Allied pilots. The P-51's revolutionary performance came from innovative design features. The laminar flow wing maintained smooth airflow over greater wing surface. This seemingly minor improvement created dramatically increased speed and range. Internal fuel capacity was equally revolutionary. Earlier fighters carried 200-300 gallons. The P-51D carried over 400 gallons internally, plus external drop tanks. This gave a combat radius of over 750 miles, enough to escort bombers anywhere in Germany and fight extended battles over targets. The Mustang's 650 caliber machine guns provided devastating firepower. Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute. This created a cone of destruction that shredded enemy aircraft in seconds. American pilots described concentrated bursts from all 6 guns like hitting them with a sledgehammer. German pilot Franz Steigler survived encounters with Mustangs. He described his shock at their firepower. "I thought I had him lined up for an easy shot, but he turned into me and opened fire. The tracers looked like a solid stream of light. I've never seen such concentrated firepower from a single-engine fighter." By early 1944, statistics showed the Mustang's impact clearly. German fighter losses climbed steadily. American bomber losses dropped dramatically. The Luftwaffe, which had dominated Reich skies for years, was suddenly fighting for its life. The transformation appeared in changing tactics on both sides. German pilots, who had made multiple attacks on unescorted bombers, now faced single desperate passes before Mustang swarms engaged them. The leisurely destruction of American formations was ending. American bomber crews reported dramatic changes in their experience. Sergeant Bill Fleming was a ball turret gunner on a B-17. He described the difference. Before Mustangs showed up, we knew once we crossed into Germany, we were alone. The fighters had to turn back. Then it was us against every German fighter in the sky. But with the 51s along, it was different. They stayed with us all the way to target and home. You could see German fighters out there, but they couldn't get through the Mustangs to reach us. German pilots felt equally profound psychological impact. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke wrote in his diary, "The Americans now have fighters that reach any target in Germany. Our pilots report these Mustangs are faster than our 109s, more maneuverable than our 190s. They seem to have unlimited fuel. How are we supposed to defend the Reich against this?" As 1944 progressed, the answer became clear. They couldn't. February 20th, 1944. Alarm bells rang at Luftwaffe airfields across Germany at dawn. American radar had detected the largest bomber formation ever assembled. Over 1,000 B-17s and B-24s heading for aircraft factories deep in the Reich. But something was different this time. Instead of usual handful of short-range escorts turning back at the border, radar showed unprecedented sights. Hundreds of P-51 Mustangs flying alongside bombers. Their signatures were clear even at maximum range. This began Big Week. 6 days of sustained combat that would determine German air power's fate. For the Luftwaffe, it was their last chance to break American daylight bombing. For Mustang pilots, it would be baptism by fire against full German fighter defenses. Oberst Hannes Trautloft commanded German fighters in Defense Sector West. He stared at the plotting board in disbelief. "They have fighters over Magdeburg," he told his staff. "Magdeburg is 400 kilometers from the nearest Allied base. How is this possible?" The answer flew at 25,000 feet above German countryside. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley was leading the 4th Fighter Group's Mustangs deeper into Germany than any Allied fighters had ever flown. Blakesley's radio crackled with pilot reports. "Bandits 2 o'clock high. I've got 3 190s coming in from the sun. Splash 1 109. The air war over Europe was changing forever. Big Week's first day saw German controllers throw everything at American formations. Over 400 Luftwaffe fighters rose to meet attackers. They were confident sheer numbers would overwhelm American escorts. What followed was massacre, but not the one Germans planned. Major George Preddy flew with the 352nd Fighter Group. He described the action in his combat report. "We were jumped by about 20 109s and 190s over Brunswick. They came in fast and aggressive, probably expecting us to be low on fuel like Thunderbolts used to be. Instead, we turned into them with full tanks and plenty of fight left. In the next 10 minutes, we shot down 8 without losing a single Mustang." German pilots experienced something they'd never encountered: sustained combat against fresh American fighters operating at full performance deep over German territory. Lieutenant Heinz Knoke flew his Bf-109G over central Germany. He later wrote, "The Mustangs seemed everywhere. Every time we tried attacking bombers, they intercepted us, and they wouldn't go away. We'd fight them 20 minutes, break off to refuel, and find them still there when we returned. By first day's end, German losses were catastrophic. 42 Luftwaffe fighters shot down. Many more damaged. American losses were minimal. Just 4 Mustangs lost in air-to-air combat. The kill ratio defining the rest of Europe's air war was becoming clear. Behind statistics lay human stories of extraordinary courage and devastating loss. Hauptmann Georg Peter Eder was one of Germany's most experienced fighter pilots. He found himself in running battles with Mustangs over his home airfield at Bad Aibling. In a letter to his sister that evening, he captured German desperation. "Today, I fought American fighters over our own base, Maria. They followed us home. They have enough fuel to chase us to our airfields and still have ammunition to strafe us on the ground. I've been flying fighters 4 years. I've never seen anything like this. The Americans aren't just winning. They're hunting us." On the American side, psychological impact was equally profound, but entirely different. Captain Chuck Yeager flew his Mustang Glamorous Glennis over Germany. He described the feeling of air superiority. "For the first time since we started flying over Germany, we felt like hunters instead of hunted. We had range to stay with bombers, performance to outfight anything they put up, and firepower to finish the job. The human cost was real on both sides." Technical Sergeant Mike Gladich was a Polish pilot flying with the American 56th Fighter Group. He shot down 3 German fighters in single engagement, but watched his wingman's Mustang explode under cannon fire from a Focke-Wulf 190. "Victory and loss," he wrote in his diary that night. "They come together in this war. You celebrate shooting down the enemy. Then mourn your friend who won't be coming home." As conventional German fighters proved unable to cope with Mustang threats, Luftwaffe commanders turned to their most advanced weapons, the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter and rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. These revolutionary aircraft promised performance finally matching or exceeding Mustang capabilities. The Me-262, with twin jet engines, could reach over 540 mph, nearly 100 mph faster than any propeller fighter. When flown by experienced pilots like Major Walter Nowotny or Oberst Johannes Steenhoff, jet fighters seemed to offer hope that German air power could regain initiative. But jets had problems. They required enormous fuel amounts, had limited endurance, were vulnerable during takeoff and landing when speed advantages disappeared. Most critically, Germany was running out of experienced pilots to fly them. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group became one of the first Allied pilots shooting down a jet aircraft. He caught an Me-262 during landing approach. His combat report reveals tactical reality. The Jerry jet was incredibly fast in level flight. But when he slowed to land, he was just another target. I got behind him on final approach and gave him a burst from 200 yards. He went straight into the ground. The rocket-powered Me-163 was even more problematic. It could climb to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes and reach over 600 mph, but it carried fuel for only 8 minutes of powered flight. Worse, the aircraft's volatile rocket fuel was so dangerous it killed more German pilots than enemy action. By spring 1944, Mustang groups developed tactics specifically designed to destroy remaining Luftwaffe fighter strength. Rather than simply escorting bombers, P-51 units began conducting fighter sweeps. Offensive missions designed to seek out and destroy German aircraft wherever found. Colonel Hubert Zemke commanded the 56th Fighter Group. He pioneered many tactics. His pilots would arrive over German airfields just as enemy fighters took off or landed, catching them at most vulnerable moments. "We're not just protecting our bombers anymore," Zemke told his pilots. We're actively hunting down every German fighter we can find. Results were devastating for the Luftwaffe. German pilot training programs, already shortened by fuel shortages, began producing inexperienced aviators. They were easy prey for veteran American pilots. Oberst Adolf Galland was one of Germany's most famous fighter aces. He later wrote, "By mid-1944, we were sending boys into combat against men. Our new pilots had perhaps 50 hours flight training. The Americans they faced had 300 hours or more. It wasn't combat, it was slaughter." Statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe had over 2,400 operational fighters. By June, that number fell to fewer than 1,500, despite continued production. The difference was simple. German fighters were shot down faster than they could be replaced. Experienced pilots were becoming extinct. Major John T. Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group became one of the war's leading aces. He flew Mustangs with 16 confirmed victories. His account of a mission over Berlin in March 1944 captures air combat's transformation over Europe. We were escorting B-17s to the big city when about 30 109s and 190s jumped us over target. 2 years ago, this would have been disaster. We would have been low on fuel, outnumbered, fighting over enemy territory. But in the Mustang, everything was different. We had plenty of fuel. Our aircraft were faster than theirs. We'd trained specifically for this fight. In 20 minutes, we shot down 8 and scattered the rest. The bombers completed their mission without losing a single aircraft to fighters. German accounts become increasingly desperate. Lieutenant Franz Stiegler described the hopelessness of German position. We'd take off with perhaps 8 or 10 aircraft. The Americans would meet us with 40 or 50 Mustangs. Our orders were attack the bombers. But we could never get through the fighter screen. By the time we landed, if we landed, half our formation would be gone. The psychological impact on German pilots was profound. Many suffered what would later be recognized as combat fatigue. German commanders dismissed this as cowardice. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke wrote in his diary, "I have flown 400 combat missions. I have shot down 33 enemy aircraft. But I am afraid now. Not of dying. I accepted that long ago. I am afraid of being helpless. The Americans have fighters that can go anywhere, do anything. We are no longer warriors. We are victims." The death blow to German air power came during spring and summer 1944. Mustang-equipped fighter groups began systematic attacks on German airfields, training bases, and aircraft factories. Operation Argument was the formal name for campaigns against German aircraft production. American fighters ranged across the Reich searching for targets. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group led one of the most successful missions, a low-level attack on an airfield near Munich. His after-action report describes systematic destruction. "We came in at treetop level and caught them completely by surprise. There were about 40 aircraft on the ground, trainers, fighters, even a few jets. We made 4 passes, strafing everything that moved. When we left, the field was covered in smoke and burning aircraft. It looked like a junkyard. These ground attacks were particularly devastating. They destroyed not just aircraft, but infrastructure needed to train new pilots. Flight training schools, fuel depots, and maintenance facilities all became targets for roving Mustangs. The Luftwaffe found itself unable to replace losses or train new pilots effectively. General Adolf Galland commanded the German fighter force. He made increasingly desperate appeals to Hitler for resources and realistic tactics. In one meeting recorded by his aide, Galland told the Führer, "We are losing the air war not because our aircraft are inferior, but because we cannot train pilots fast enough to replace losses. The Americans are shooting down our experienced pilots faster than we can create new ones. Hitler's response was typical. Blame the pilots rather than face strategic reality. German pilots lack fighting spirit, he declared. They must be ordered to ram enemy aircraft if necessary. Such orders only accelerated destruction of what remained of German air power. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the transformation was complete. The Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over Normandy beaches, against over 14,000 Allied sorties. German fighters were so rare that many Allied pilots completing tours never saw an enemy aircraft. Kill ratios tell the story with mathematical precision. In 1943, before Mustang arrival, German and American fighter losses were roughly equal. By 1944, American pilots were shooting down German fighters at ratios of nearly 4-to-1. In some engagements, ratios reached 10-to-1 or higher. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group would finish the war with 24 victories. He described the situation. By late 1944, encountering German fighters was actually unusual. When we did find them, they were usually inexperienced pilots flying in small formations. The Luftwaffe that had terrorized Europe in 1940 simply no longer existed. The human cost was staggering. The Luftwaffe lost over 13,000 pilots killed in action during 1944 alone, more than the previous 3 years combined. Among the dead were many of Germany's most experienced aces, men like Hauptmann Hans Joachim Marseille and Major Helmut Wick. Their loss could never be replaced. October 1943 brought us full circle to where we started. High above German countryside, Oberleutnant Hans Weick squinted through his Messerschmitt Bf-109's canopy at an unfamiliar silhouette. The aircraft below looked wrong. Too sleek, too clean, with an odd bubble canopy that seemed almost American in design. But that was impossible. American fighters couldn't reach this deep into the Reich. They simply didn't have the range. Wake rolled his fighter into a diving attack. He was confident in what would be another easy victory against lumbering American bombers and their inadequate escorts. What happened next shattered everything the Luftwaffe thought they knew about air combat over Europe. The strange aircraft below suddenly accelerated with bursts of speed that left Wake's Messerschmitt struggling to keep pace. Then it turned. Not the wide, sluggish turn of typical American fighters, but a tight, vicious spiral that brought 650 caliber machine guns to bear on the German pilot's position. In 3 seconds, Hans Weick went from predator to prey. His world exploded in a storm of American lead. This was the P-51 Mustang's debut over occupied Europe. It would change the course of the war in ways neither side could have imagined. The P-51 Mustang's impact on World War II extended far beyond simple air-to-air combat statistics. By achieving air superiority over Europe, Mustang pilots made possible the strategic bombing campaign that crippled German war production. Without constant threat of fighter attack, American and British bombers could attack targets with devastating precision. The psychological impact was equally important. German civilians, who had been told Reich air defenses were impregnable, watched helplessly as Allied aircraft appeared over their cities in broad daylight. The myth of German invincibility, carefully cultivated by Nazi propaganda, crumbled under the contrails of American bombers escorted by Mustangs. For the men who flew the Mustang, the aircraft represented something more than superior technology. Captain Clarence Bud Anderson flew 116 combat missions without being shot down, he later reflected. The P-51 didn't just give us better performance, it gave us confidence. We knew we were flying the best fighter in the world. That knowledge made us better pilots. The German perspective was inevitably different. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff survived the war to become a general in the post-war German Air Force. He wrote, "The Mustang was the aircraft that broke our back, not because it was so much better than our fighters, though it was, but because it could reach anywhere in Germany and stay there to fight. It turned our homeland into a hunting ground for American pilots." When the war ended in May 1945, Air War statistics told a story of complete transformation. The Luftwaffe, which began the war as the world's most advanced air force, was reduced to a handful of aircraft hidden in forests and caves. German pilot training had virtually ceased. Fuel shortages meant even experienced pilots rarely flew. P-51 Mustang groups had compiled achievement records unmatched in aviation history. The 4th Fighter Group alone was credited with over 1,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. The 352nd Fighter Group produced more aces than any other American unit. Collectively, Mustang pilots were credited with destroying over 4,150 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. More than half of all German aircraft shot down by American fighters. But beyond the numbers lies more profound transformation. The Mustang proved that technological superiority, properly applied, could overcome numerical disadvantages and geographical barriers. It demonstrated that air power, when achieved decisively, could influence an entire war's outcome. The story of the P-51 Mustang and its World War II impact is ultimately about the intersection of technology, strategy, and human courage. The aircraft itself was remarkable, a fusion of American industrial capability and engineering innovation that produced performance levels thought impossible just years earlier. But technology alone didn't win the air war over Europe. It was won by young men, most barely out of their teens. They climbed into single-seat fighters and flew deep into enemy territory for mortal combat. Men like Chuck Yeager, George Preddy, and Don Gentile combined exceptional skill with extraordinary courage. They achieved air superiority over the most heavily defended airspace in the world. The German pilots they faced were equally brave and skilled, often flying aircraft technically superior in specific performance areas. But they fought a losing battle against industrial warfare mathematics. America's ability to produce aircraft, train pilots, and sustain operations at intercontinental distances ultimately proved decisive. The P-51 Mustang became the instrument of that victory. But it was the men who flew it who achieved it. In the end, the air war over Europe was won not by machines, but by courage and skill of pilots who flew them into combat day after day, until the enemy could no longer rise to meet them. When German pilots first encountered the P-51 Mustang in late 1943, many dismissed it as just another American fighter. Fast, perhaps, but nothing they couldn't handle. By 1945, those same pilots, if they had survived, knew better. The Mustang hadn't just defeated the Luftwaffe. It had made their defeat inevitable. The laughter had long since died away, replaced by silence of empty airfields and echoes of a once mighty air force. It had been systematically destroyed by American pilots flying the finest fighter aircraft of World War II. Season 2. The P-51 Mustang had written the final chapter in German air power's story, and that chapter was titled Defeat.